Welcome to kabarinews.com. My name is John Uy from San Francisco. Today I have Russell Matulich. How are you, Russ?
Very good, John. How are you this morning?
Very good, thank you. Could you give me some background? Where were you born? How did you get education and start this business? And basically your life journey.
Very happy to give you my life journey. I'll keep it short, but I was born here in California, very unusual. Not many people that live in California are born in California, but I was born in what's now the Silicon Valley, and that was 1963, so 57 glorious years ago almost. And I grew up in California and went to college right after. College initially wasn't for me, so I joined the U.S. Army and was an intelligence analyst in the Army for a couple of years in South Korea, and then came back and finished up my bachelor's, my master's, and finished all my PhD coursework with a bent towards organizational behavior and management theory. Coming back after all of those great years in education, I ended up working for a company that was servicing cables to Asia and to Australia, and I was working on various projects, including helping to build cables to China, throughout Southeast Asia, and into Australia. And then one day I was very, very lucky. I was thinking about a project of building to Southeast Asia, and a friend of mine who was CEO at a company called Telent, Indonesian company, was very fortunate and invited me to participate and be a co-investor. And so I started RTI roughly 7 years ago, and now RTI is one of the largest, if not the largest, private network in the world. And I'm so grateful to Pak Rirek, who's now CEO of PT Telecom, because he's given me opportunities. And that's where I met Joseph, my colleague next to me, who now works with me here in Los Angeles. So that's the short journey, but it's been a very fun journey for sure.
And what does RTI stands for?
Well, RTI is the initials are mine. R is my first name, Russ, but RAM Telecom International was the original name of the 10 companies that I have around the globe, and RAM is my initials, RAM, Russell Allen Matulich. So we just shorten that because saying RTI is a lot easier than saying RAM Telecom International. So that's how we got the name.
What actually inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
Well, I was always an intrapreneur. By intrapreneur, I mean that I was always thinking independently and creatively, even inside of big corporations where I worked for 20 years, some of the world's largest corporations. But I never was satisfied in those jobs, and I always wanted to do my own thing. And I suppose I was always inspired, but I felt like I was held back working for the big companies. And so when the opportunity came to try to raise an impossible amount of money, it seemed like it at the time, I jumped at it. And of course, it sounds ridiculous because at the time I was being requested to raise my first 85 million US for this investment. And I said, sure, we can raise that. And, I didn't have $85 million on me at the time. But we've gone on to now have roughly 500 million US working capital. But what really inspired me with all of that is people. This business, which seems like a very high-tech business, and it is, all of the world's telecommunications travel over fiber optic cables, but that's not what inspires me. What inspires me, and what has always continued to amaze me, is the connections to people. And ironically, this technology business has very little to do with technology when you get it started. It has everything to do with people, getting people connected. And I suppose that somewhere in my subconscious is the desire to make these connections. I've traveled roughly coming up on more than 6 million miles around the globe, and to I don't know how many countries, but many. And I spent roughly 35 to 40% of my time in Asia, Australia, and Western Europe.
Tell me more about the RTI projects. Some people may not understand how you contribute on the internet service, on the data, especially with large data amount.
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, the RTI projects are all about subsea fiber optic cables. And most people think that cables go via satellite, but they don't. Most cables or most data transmissions, whether you're searching on the internet or making a phone call, 99% of those go over fiber optic cable. And that cable goes under the ocean. And so what we set out to do is build what amounts to a giant highway, an internet highway, but under the water, under the ocean. And so when people type in a Google search, or when they're on Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever social network or internet search that they're using, or Netflix or Amazon, you can go on and on, all of those travel over the internet. And there's no way to get, just like it's impossible to get from Jakarta to Los Angeles, by just walking there. You have to take a highway, you have to take a freeway. In this case, the freeway is under the ocean. But these cables are incredibly complex. They take 5 to 7 years to build, and they cost, typically they cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So it sounds easier than it is. It already sounds complex, but the average length of time to do it is roughly 7 years. That's probably the average. We've shortened that down substantially to 5 years, but it's still 5 years of time. And the permits required to get these cables are also incredibly complex, because you have to go to various governments. When we built a cable to Indonesia, the Southeast Asia, United States cable system, for example, we had to get permission from the Indonesian authorities, from the US authorities, federal, state, local, from the fishermen, from all of the different agencies and people that you would think have input to the process. But let me just say that what RTI's goal was is to create a network that was independent of these other networks, and went to giant population centers, because the utilization of any cable is a function of the population that it serves. And what does that mean? It means that we go to the big countries where there's big populations. So RTI's cables are connected into Sydney, Australia, where you have big data centers. We're pending Hong Kong, which we're in the middle of constructing now. Tokyo, which is already up and working. Guam, which is up and working. And then also Los Angeles. And then the Southeast Asia cable continues from Los Angeles, Hawaii to Guam, and then interconnects into Indonesia and Philippines.
Now, what is the capacity of these cables?
Oh, it's an astonishing amount of capacity. In total, what's called 100 terabits of capacity, of owned subsea capacity, which, if you think about it, put it in context, if you think about 100 terabits, all of Asia's traffic today is on networks. If everything were lit today, it would total to 30 terabits. I mean, when I say everything, I'm talking about Asia, Australia, and all the communications between Asia, Australia, and the United States. That's about 30 terabits. And RTI's networks, 3 of the 5 cables which are up, amount to over 100 terabits. So the networks that we're building have 3 times the capacity of the entire capacity that's in place today. And what does that mean for consumers and for businesses? That means faster internet connections. It means the ability to do much more with the data that they have. It means the ability to do Zoom calls with 50 people, with family members. It means the ability for entrepreneurs to have all of this capacity at their leisure to develop. What it means is better trade, communications, education. Because when you look at what cables do, they do 3 things: trade, education, communication. Trade, they increase the economic benefit to every cable, to every location where they land. They increase the GDP of countries. Education, the internet has tremendous education on it, and it's all free. Of course, accessing it is complicated, but the education is out there. So, and there's a direct correlation between highly educated countries and people and the amount of cables that connect into that country. So education is the second one. And then third is communication. What cables do most of all is what I set out to do in the very beginning, and that is communication. They connect people and they keep people connected, which is why we developed this project called Project Sun, which is a project that I'm working on called Subsea Uniting Nations, SUN. And we're putting together a giant mural and recognition of the countries that are landing their cables with us. Because in addition to building cables to the world's largest economies, in this building where we're sitting, we also land other cables for other giant companies. And in this back room behind me, which is just a small room, there are more than $2 billion of cables that land in that room that exceed, I would say, in less than 4 years, more than 30% of all of the internet searches. Everything that is done on the internet will go through that building in 4 years' time. So it's a very long answer to your question, but the key is cables are trade, education, communication, and the reason why there are not more cables is because the complexity. It takes a long time to build these things, and they're very complicated.
Is the cable made here in the United States, or is it made?
There are three locations where the cable itself is manufactured. Now you have to remember that you're pulling together literally thousands of piece parts when you build a cable from dozens of countries. They're all connecting together to 3 locations. Either they're built by the French, just south of France in Calais. They're built by the Japanese in southern Japan, or they're built by the Americans on the east coast of the U.S. So there are 3 companies that do the vast majority of these subsea cables. There are other smaller companies, but among those 3, roughly 95% of all the subsea cables are built. But once you get all the piece parts ordered, they come into one location, then they have to be assembled. And while all that assembly is working, of course, while all that assembly is working, what you're trying to do is coordinate all the permits as well. And the permits are complicated.
But your project's also not just the ocean, laying cables on the ocean, but also going inland, correct?
Yes, yeah. Well, once you bring it into a room like what we have next door, once it comes into that room and it lands, then it's like an airport hub. When you take a flight from Jakarta to Los Angeles, when you get off, you're in the airport in Los Angeles. Then you either take a rental car, a taxi, or some other mode of transportation to a different destination. And that's just like the cables. Once cables land in that room over there, they go to other various destinations where they interconnect with other cables, and they get broken down into smaller chunks. And these, what they call carrier hotels, they're already established all around the world. They're just not publicized for security reasons. But in Los Angeles, actually, it's the largest, has the largest number of carrier hotels in the world, and you would never know it. You might be driving by one that looks like a grocery store. Or in this location, we're hiding in plain sight. We outside of the doors of these high security doors, it's just an average shopping mall. You wouldn't know it. So we do that for security reasons, and also because you have to, the way that the service, the equipment has to work, it needs its own environment, and you need high-tech people working on it. So that's why you see a sterile environment behind you. It's almost is like a hospital in here. That's why we have to bring the color in too, because it has to be fun.
And also another thing, is there any redundancy as far as, let's say if there's an earthquake on one line, is there something that has a backup system?
Yeah, what we do is there are a number of cables in between these countries and economies, and so when cables break, and there's really 3 reasons when cables get interrupted. First and foremost, it's earthquakes or floods or tsunamis, and that's the number 1 reason. The second reason the cable might get interrupted is fishermen. Fishing vessels will either slice right through it, or a fishing net might pick it up. And the third one is some random event which is impossible to predict. But if you think about how often that happens, between here and Japan, the average cable cut, if you will, is about once every 7 years. But there are a number of cables so that when one breaks or one gets cut or something unusual happens, customers have the big companies like Google and Facebook that have ownership and buy from companies like me. They have a number of different routes in between, say, Jakarta and Los Angeles. It's like having a number of planes. If one plane isn't working that day, then you just take the next plane. So customers do have to, because of significant weather events and all of the changes in geopolitical situations, Big companies have to have multiple networks on standby so they can move in between these different networks. So yeah, redundancy is essential. That's a great question.
And if it get cut, is it easy to put it together?
It's easier to put together than it has been in the past, but it's very expensive. The average cable cut is roughly, it takes maybe 10 to 12 days to repair if there's a ship in the region, and it's about at a cost of $1 to $1.3 million. So there are these established maintenance zones where a certain number of ships can travel to repair cables, but there are these unique places on the planet where there are not a lot of ships, and it could take 3 to 6 months to repair a cut cable. And the citizens on either side of those cables may have to wait to get their communications up. In the case of Saipan, Guam to Saipan, that cable in 2017 was cut, and it was cut on a Thursday, and there was no ATM machines, no cash machines. And then on that Thursday night, they went to the Thursday afternoon, they went to the bank to take out their money after they couldn't get the ATM, but they couldn't get access to their money. And so on Friday morning, people had a medical appointment. There was no access to medicine because there was no patient records. And by Friday afternoon, people on Saipan were pretty upset, and they had no access to the airport either. The airport was shut down because that was a one cable economy. But I think the worst news to Saipan came on Friday night when everybody was trying to sign in to watch Game of Thrones. And that's when the citizens got upset. If there's no cable to watch cable TV and shows like Game of Thrones, then people get quite upset. And it took 20 days to repair that. So 20 days, no airport, no access to your bank account. I mean, it's really changed how the world uses cables. That one event in 2017, most people wouldn't know about the Guam Saipan cable, but it does show you that how reliant our world economy has become on fiber optic cables.
What is your biggest challenge owning a company?
My biggest challenge in owning a company has nothing to do with, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the people. We have tremendous people. RTI is, for a company that has $500 million working for us, we have only 30 people because we're selling to the very big companies. And we have great people. One of the most diverse companies, I think, as a percentage of the whole in the world. We have individuals here from Indonesia, Japan, Singapore, and we have 5 people in Australia, maybe 6 in Japan, maybe 5 in Singapore, and Guam, Hawaii, and in California. Very diverse, and also leadership position, men and women. It doesn't really matter. And the religions in the group are just as diverse as the people. So the people make it amazing. But the biggest challenge is that we have to work. We have to be like Switzerland. We have to avoid making the relationships with companies like Google and Amazon complicated. They have tremendous buying power, but they can't get cables built around us because we have all the relationships, and like other companies like us, we have the relationships. So we have to survive in a world where we have to walk in between Google and Amazon, and then we have to deal with world economies on a permitting level. So we have to Chinese and American politics are quite complicated right now. And while they're complicated, the people inside of the Chinese government are dealing with the American government, but the commercial people that build cables are getting things done. So the biggest complication, biggest challenges are getting the permits that we need to get cables built in these very complicated geopolitical times. But we rise to the occasion. I once described the people that work in this industry can be described like this. If there's a giant fire a mile away and you see everybody running away from that fire, you'll see just a few people running towards that fire with a garden hose. And those are the people that are in the undersea cable business. Those are the people that are at RTI. They're the ones that, against all odds, take up these challenges and want to fight the fires with the fewest resources possible. Because at the end of the day, money doesn't build these cables, relationships do. And so I would say without a doubt, the challenges are foreign governments and dealing with them. They're actually very good to deal with, but they're a complicated process where geopolitics fit in. And then outside of that, it's walking a fine line with the industry giants so that we don't We don't upset anyone, but we don't let ourselves get taken advantage of either, because just because somebody's larger doesn't mean that that they have the ability to say buy from us at below our cost. So we're happy to walk away from things that don't make sense for us financially.
What do you see the opportunity in the future?
The opportunity in the future is for us to continue to connect people around the world. And right now, our cables between Los Angeles, Guam, Hong Kong coming soon, Japan now, Australia, and then in Southeast Asia, those cables connect up to about 2 billion people on a daily basis. That's the amount of people that they would reach. So then taking that concept now from Los Angeles and going to New York and extending it across the Atlantic into Paris and London, and then that gives me the ability to extend further to Latin America. So in the next 5 years, we will be connected to, when I say we have currently about 2 billion people will reach. Once we connect from here, and it's only 3 cities. It's from here, Los Angeles, into New York, Paris, and London. That will get us connected to roughly 5 to 6 billion people. And so when I say we're connecting to people, I mean it metaphorically, but I also mean it literally. You know, it's my dream to take the concept that we built and connect the world. And so, but why? What does that mean? It makes it more efficient. So people that are in Paris can, just like a plane, they can hop on, they can get off in Australia, they can get off in Tokyo, they can get off on, and push their data or their internet search to any of those locations more efficiently, more cost effectively, and without all the hassles that they might have using multiple networks along the way. So if I can put that all together on one network, which I plan to, and I'm sure we will be able to do that, it will connect more efficiently 5 billion people. So that's how we're changing the world, because when you're connecting that many people, it seems like an impossible task. But then again, our first $85 million to build between Los Angeles and Guam was by far harder than the next 400 million that we had to raise.
Okay, and what advice would you give for entrepreneurs, Indonesian entrepreneurs who wants to do business through online?
Yeah. Well, I'm not feeling like I'm qualified to advise proactively, but I will tell you what worked for me. And my advice to myself was fail forward. That was always my advice. And I constantly failed. It wasn't the successes, the great self-help books. It wasn't any of the big deals that I got done earlier in my career. It was the failures. By far, the failures were the single most influential part of my life and my journey and my career. And because of failing, you only have 2 choices when you fail. You either take your ball and go home, or you stand up and you continue to walk forward. So the motto in our family, our small family, I have 2 boys, and they're 18 and 19 now, but it is to fail forward, because it's not a matter of what happens if you fail. We constantly fail as the human beings. And so it's about failing, but standing up and moving forward, maybe with some wounds, maybe with some pain, and maybe with some suffering, but you have to fail, and you will fail. And as you fail, you have to get up and continue to move forward. Sometimes you're going to get knocked down, but you have to take a step to the side and continue to walk forward. So I don't feel qualified to give advice to the world, but I would say for me, it's all been about failing forward, and that's allowed me. It's humbled me first of all and foremost, but then it's allowed me to see more clearly, to be more empathetic, and to use my time more wisely.
Maybe there's one advice you can give us. The challenge that you had when you have to get or raise $85 million. How did you do that?
Well, the money got raised because we got told no more than 250 times from U.S. banks. So we had this great business plan, and we went and we told banks, and the banks said, "Oh, it's too much money. Oh, it's too little money. The opportunity's not going to work. The idea is not great. Nobody wants to build." I could give you hundreds and hundreds of explanations. And the people who were telling us no were usually quite rude. They would, I just remember the most unusual meetings, people eating and throwing away their garbage, doing unusual things while they're telling us no, and or hanging up on us. But that didn't deter us, didn't deter me. Even when the company was a total of one person, I was doing it with no money, and I was doing it flying back and forth on my frequent flyer miles to international destinations to meet people in Indonesia that helped me to build my first cable. I was staying at hotels on points, and I was flying with family members' money to around the world to make these things happen. So it was because no wasn't the answer. There was never no was never going to be acceptable. The idea was a good idea because what did it do? It solved a problem, and something that solves a problem will get done if there are the means to do it. So was I relentless? No, I was 10 times more than relentless. It was the pursuit of my life to pursue and capture the first 85 million that would be the platform for launching into several $100 million of investment, what will be by the end of next year, $1 billion private company. And it's more than being relentless, because relentless is just a simple word. It was about, there was no answer that would have been acceptable to me that would have been, no, sorry, I tried my best. I love that quote from Star Wars from Yoda. It's do or do not, there is no try, right? And I used to think that was so unsympathetic in that movie Star Wars, but it was just being a matter of fact. You either do or you don't, but it doesn't matter if you try, because you will try and you will fail, and you just have to, well, I guess it gets back to my failing forward. So I think you have to visualize the answer, what you're going to do. I had to visualize the answer, and nothing less than getting to my destination would have been acceptable.
But let's say for entrepreneurs that needs capital, okay,
Mm-hmm.
one, of course, go to the bank, but
Yep.
many banks refuse.
Mm-hmm.
Please, do you have other sources for advice where to look for?
Sure. Well, you have to go to friends and family. You have to ask for capital, and they're going to be. That's what I did, and in the early days, it was tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands. It wasn't giant money, but you have to go to friends and family. But also, if you on LinkedIn and other professional databases, if you look at somebody who shares your similar values, it's very interesting to look at their story and see how they did something. So in the meantime, while you're asking family for money, or you've got extra points on your hotel or your airlines that you have to use, you also have to do your research. There are other people that have similar values to you. Find out what they're doing, because if you're struggling to raise your money or develop your idea, you have to have two things. One, you have to have people that can help you look at your idea objectively. If you're going to open up an ice cream store, in the middle of Southeast Asia without any access to electricity, that's probably not a great idea, right? Because it doesn't add up. It doesn't solve a problem. But if you're going to develop a social network that's going to set the world on fire because of how it delivers the content, then you may want to find out others that have taken that similar journey on different social networks, see what they did, or what made them fail. Now, of course, there's a lot of data out there. People are just spinning stories about the great successes. What I like to talk about is the great failures, because that's where you learn things from people, and that's where you get to what really happened. So I think that as you look at the resources you have and the family you have, you also have to look at the people that have gone through the similar pain that you have and see what their story is. But find somebody who will give you honest and fair guidance, whether it's a family member or a business person. I've had to tell, I haven't told people, hey, it's a bad idea. There's no such thing. But what I do when they ask me, because I try to volunteer as much time as I can, I will continue to just ask them questions. Well, what's how will you develop this idea? How many people do you think would use it? How much risk are you willing to take? And what I do is I try to help them, maybe Socratically, to get to the answer that they're looking for. And so I think that along with looking for friends and advisors, you have to be able to look at yourself honestly. And the only way to do that is to ask people that you know and respect that will give you frank answers for their opinion on what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Finally, I see that you have Joseph Raja. Perhaps you can say something.
Yeah, I'm going to give him my headset because so he can hear you. So hold on. Okay. Joseph Raja has joined our company. He's from Tallinn, but let me put him on fine.
Hi, Pak John.
Hello. Maybe you can say something. How on working with Russ.
Right. Russ is really good and have a innovative idea about the submarine cable. I like how he do the leadership of this company, and the most important thing, how he treat the employee like a family. That's our motto. Actually, we work like family here. We support each other and learn something new, and also we sharing without hiding something. It's really a good company actually, and hopefully Indonesian will get educated with this interview with Russ about the submarine cable and understand more about how the internet traffic flows through the submarine cable. Thank you, Pak John, for this interview with Russ.
Excellent. Thank you, Russ and Joseph.
Thank you, Russ,
for the time interview.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. And to kabarinews.com readers, thank you and hope to see you soon.
Terima kasih.